So what does process development mean for someone who's kind of in their postdoc stage or coming in for R&D, who might not really understand how big that umbrella is, or what are some of the things that really define that area?
Yeah. So, in my perspective, process development is to develop and optimize the process for manufacture a drug. Depending on what kind of drug you're working on, the process development, it might be very different. It would use totally different process. It might need different skill set, but the mindset of the process development would be fairly similar. For example, like in the field or the process that I'm working on, one of the major goal of the process is to scale up the process, because normally where this process development start to get involved is the research and R&D team. They develop a kind of a drug or a new medicine, but it is in a very small scale, in a vial or in a shake flask, that is not able to supply the dose for the patient. And one of the major goal in my team, it would be how are we going to scale up that process, which transfer from the R&D. They only have a process that can use a shake flask, which is 200 ml shake flask to produce a product. How can we scale it up to 15 liter, 50 liter, 500 liter, and it still have the same performance, delivering the same quality of the drug? So it's, the major focus on my job is how to scale up this whole process and also ensure we're delivering the same quality to the patient.
Okay. Alireza, Shreya, and Jonathan, anything to add to that? Is that fairly kind of anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that the nuance in process development as opposed to some of the basic research is twofold. So one is scale up. How can you actually turn this into a medicine and actually make it? Another is how can you do it reliably? Where in basic research, you do the experiment and it works some fraction of times, and then you can write up in a paper. But when you're actually making a medicine, it has to work every time. So it has to be described well enough that you know exactly how to do it. You can get someone in a manufacturing facility to do it for you and to do it correctly every single time. And characterization around really understanding what's going on in your process, really knowing if it's on track, really knowing if it's consistent, such that you have confidence to eventually put that product into a person and know that you can do it safely.
Okay, great. Now, so if we kind of were to describe the day-to-day work of what this, what is Shreya, what does your typical day look like?
Sure, happy to answer that question. So it's very interesting. My typical day, looks very similar to what maybe a PhD student's or a postdoc's day looks like. There's going to be weeks which it is very experiment lab heavy, right? Because I'm developing a process, I'm optimizing the process, and I have to be in the lab executing the activities. I will be running multiple experiments. Sometimes, they might be going through multiple weeks. So I'm busy in the lab. But sometimes, some weeks are very paperwork heavy. So maybe I'm working on the protocol for the process, or maybe I'm working on a report with the data that was generated, or I'm working on data analysis. So the science part of it is very similar, at least for all the entry-level people who are entering into process development. Mm-hmm. Of course, there is the aspect of client interaction. So I work in a contract manufacturing and development organization. So I'm interacting with clients who are utilizing Lonza services to help transfer again their products to a commercial scale, or like manufacturing it at a larger scale. So then I'm interacting with clients, and I'm also interacting actually with other departments, because my process development, I will develop the process, but it has to be transferred to manufacturing. So for that, I'll have to undergo some validation of the process or tech transfer of the process. So I'm then interacting with all the other departments who will help me transfer that process to the other manufacturing. So that might also involve maybe sometimes training people on terms of the paperwork and things like that. And as you keep moving like up the ladder in process development, sometimes you might also help the client even with their IND filings and different kind of regulatory applications. So yeah, it's a very it's a very interesting role in terms of you can be as niche as you want to be, but you can also branch out as you want to be. It really depends on which project you are being added to and what is kind of the ask for that project.
Very interesting. Alireza, would you say your experience was similar when you first started? And if yes or no, how also has it changed throughout the years to kind of what you do now? What is your day-to-day look like now? And how has that evolved from when you first started?
Yeah, I agree that that's basically was very similar to my experience when you start out of academia as a scientist or senior scientist in industry. That's basically what's expected of you. As a scientist, you are going to have your own project to lead, very similar to your your PhD topic, for example, that you were leading. One thing I want to add is, and that was mentioned also by Surya, but maybe I put it in a different in different words. When you start as a scientist in industry, because of all the interactions you have to have with other teams and other people, your technical expertise would be actually only about, depending on the job you're doing, but your technical expertise is only about, let's say, half of your expectations. The rest of the half and the rest of your delivery and efficiency at work comes down to how well you manage your relationships with with the other departments, with the other people in your team, how well you communicate, how open-minded you are to changing things that you've learned, and now you come to industry and you realize that some of the things might be done differently, and so that basically speaks to your scientific prowess and you as a scientist, and that will having some of these characteristics really help you a lot to be part of a team. Usually that's what is expected from you in the industry, as opposed to what you usually do in academia, where it is only you and your PI, and you are just very laser focused on your own stuff, and there's usually not other departments you need to deal with. There is no analytical department, there is no tech transfer, there is no manufacturing, there is no research that you have to communicate and keep everything juggling. Yep, more or less that's very similar to my experience when I started.
Alireza, a quick question. Firstly, I don't know if you can see, but Shreya and Kevin are nodding very energetically as you were reflecting that. That's a very interesting point, actually. So you're saying it's quite different to when you were in academia in terms of the types of people you had to communicate with on a day-to-day, and the types of relationships you had to manage. How did you adjust when you moved into industry, into that needing to do that? What was the most helpful thing? How did you adjust? What was the biggest struggle? How did you overcome that? So many questions there.
Very hard. It's very hard to make that adjustments, where especially like when you are coming off of your PhD, you are technically you would be the world expert in whatever you've done in your PhD, right? A lot of us come out of our PhD labs, our academic environment, and we have this pride and ego and all of that, and sometimes it really becomes it blocks a lot of the learning opportunities that you might have and you might face in industry. So if you have that sort of attitude, it really does not help you when you need to be communicating with other people who might have other opinions, who might have different expectations to do a certain job. As in a company, as part of a team, you are aligned with the company goals. So you have to make sure that when you are working with other people, these other people are coming from different backgrounds, different education, different positions, and you have to deliver together as a team what's the company goal. You have your own personal goals, but your personal goal must be aligned with the company goal. And so it's very important that you have proper communication skills, planning, organizational skills, a lot of things that, when you see and people, list them on their resumes, but you really want to make sure you have these skills, you demonstrate them, and when you are applying for jobs, you have good examples of that to express to your potential employer, to show about your abilities, that you can work in a team, because working in a team is 50% of your job, not only your technical abilities.
Okay.
Yeah, and
what helped you learn quickly?
Failure. And failure can happen, issues come up and you learn. Obviously, if you haven't mastered that, when you were doing your academic environment, you learn that on the job, and you realize that if you in academia, you're doing your experiment and it doesn't work, and it's only you, so you can actually stay overnight and work over hours, over time, and have repeat the experiment and have the results the next day. But you can't do that in academia, in industry, because people have lives out of industry. You can't expect them for people to put everything they are doing down to help you with something. So it comes down having people skills, being really organized, and being a planner really help in managing those. Are big part of people skills, actually, to manage those relationship and communications.
Jonathan, were those skills also necessary because I know Kevin, Shreya, and Alireza have kind of the CDMO experience, right? So with you in a biotech setting, was that as critical at that point of entry?
Which skill are you referring to?
The kind of communication. Did you also have to communicate to many different departments and stakeholders to kind of as a process development unit? Who did you talk to, and was that also?
Yeah. I mean, I think that the perception of lab work in a biotech as being very similar to lab work in a PhD is actually, the lab work itself is pretty similar, but you're working in an integrated team of people who everything you do relates to what they do. So you spend far more of your time talking to people than you would expect from your PhD. Like it's not uncommon to have 1 or 2 meetings a day where you have to talk about, even at the entry level, by the time you're more senior level, you can expect to be spending most of your time in meetings where it's all about communicating, understanding what other people are doing, explaining what you're doing, why that's important for other people, and why they should care and why they interact with that. I think that's a better predictor of success than technical knowledge. Certainly you do need the technical knowledge to succeed, but where people struggle, it's almost always in communication. Either they can't get their ideas across, they can't get people on board with what they're doing. That's where I've seen the most failures in people who get into industry. It's rare. I mean, certainly you meet people who don't have a technical skill set, but that's much less common. If you finished a PhD, you can probably run certain assays, certain piece of equipment sufficiently. Even if you finished undergrad, you can probably figure that out. The more common situation is just you can't fit in with the team, you can't communicate, you can't understand what other people are saying to you. That I've seen is the bigger pain point for where people struggle.
So for people coming out of academia who really like that aspect of it, of kind of working independently, operating at a level of creativity that doesn't really have boundaries in a sense, do you feel like that is not allowed or encouraged, or that?
No, it's absolutely allowed and encouraged, but you have to be able to articulate to your manager and to your colleagues what you're doing. There's no room for someone to say, hey, I've got some great ideas, come back in 3 years and I'll have written a paper. You have to say, I've got great ideas. This is what those ideas are. This is why you, my boss, should give me the money and give me the time to do it. Oftentimes you hire to do a specific task. And if you've got an idea of how you would do things differently or do something different instead, you have to be able to convince the person who thought they should hire you to do that task that they are in fact not correct and you should be doing something differently. So even if you want to do something super creative and it's the right thing to do, to be permitted to do it, to get the endorsement from all the people in the company who need to be on board to allow you to do that thing, requires communication.
Okay, understood. Kevin, thank you for that, Jonathan. Kevin, you mentioned you've kind of moved through the different scales, right? The scaling requirements. So you started off coming in and then now you're in charge of scale up. What part, what does that mean essentially to scale up? I think you mentioned it briefly before, but in a technical sense, in a skill set sense, what are some of the skill sets required to kind of that really contribute to the work you do around scaling up? And did you have any of those skill sets coming out of your PhD or your kind of earlier career paths that set you up for that? Was there a couple of skill sets or things that you accumulated from your training days that helped you?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So right now I am mainly working on bioreactor scale up. And first of all, I did not have the experience on the bioreactor during my PhD. What I work on, it is very similar to what the R&D department working on, using the shake flask to demonstrate the proof of concept, and all the bioreactor skill set that I learned is starting from entering the industry. And actually, I think most of the people who also work with me, my colleague, they also get those experience from the industry rather than in the academic, simply because in academia, it does not have that many resources of the bioreactor in the lab. People normally working in the lab scale. So for me, my skill set or experience on the developing this process is mainly from the industry.
Okay. And Jonathan, would you say the same thing? Were your technical skills coming out of academia all useful? What, the questions coming in from the audience is kind of what skills has really helped set you up for success, okay, from your academic period to
so technical skills and so technical skills and process development are actually very important. When I review resumes, anyone who has never run a bioreactor, never run a shake flask, never run a downstream, if you've never run bioreactor, shake flask, various assays for a process, downstream purification, if you've never done any of those things, it's pretty hard to get your resume past that first screen. For better or for worse, I mean, many of those tools can be trained, but if you've done a PhD, maybe take one step back. In your PhD, the most likely outcome is you build a set of skills that are going to be relevant for your next job. The likelihood that your next job uses the basic science that you developed in your PhD is much lower. I mean, for me, my PhD was in pluripotent stem cell process development. I knew everything about pluripotent stem cell biology. My first job was in red blood cells, which I never worked in. But I understood how bioreactors work. I understood how scale-up worked. I understood how you can control cell differentiation. And so those were skill sets that are sort of the transferable skill sets that were of relevance. And so that's where I would say it's really important in your PhD. If you are coming out of a PhD and you can run a Western blot and you can do an ELISA, every CV that I have ever received has a skill section says Western blot and ELISA. If you have come out of your PhD and you said, hey, I did a portion of my PhD applying those things to a bioreactor culture, I understand bioreactor control, scale up parameters, oxygen flow rate calculations, any of those various things, that sets you apart from the pack, from the people who have done the basic science PhDs that are harder to understand if they're going to be a good fit. Does that make sense?
So you have some basic skill sets which are kind of good for baseline, but some of the more specific skill sets could kind of add value to your CV. And it's not the technology that you're developing, it's literally kind of skill sets and techniques that you are using in your academic career that become valuable on your CV for you.
Exactly. I mean, there are going to be specific companies that are working in the identical field to where you did your PhD. And there's a chance that they need someone to just continue that science, in particular if it's a company that's spun out of your academic lab. there might be a clear fit for hopping over. But if you're saying, hey, I'm going to go out and get a job in industry, the thing they're looking for is not, do you know all the transcription factors that are important for pluripotent stem cells? Someone who receives your CV is going to say, I've got a job posting for a process development scientist for which the job is to run bioreactors or run purification columns. And if you've done either of those things, I'll pick up the phone with you. If you haven't done either of those things, I'm going to have to train you on the very basics of what your job is. You're a less competitive candidate. But I understood how bioreactors work. I understood how scale-up worked. I understood how you can control cell differentiation. And so those were skill sets that are sort of the transferable skill sets that were of relevance. And so that's where I would say it's really important in your PhD. If you are coming out of a PhD and you can run a Western blot and you can do an ELISA, every CV that I have ever received has a skill section that says Western blot and ELISA. If you have come out of your PhD and you said, hey, I did a portion of my PhD applying those things to a bioreactor culture. I understand bioreactor control, scale-up parameters, oxygen flow rate calculations, any of those various things. That sets you apart from the pack, from the people who have done the basic science PhDs that are harder to understand if they're going to be a good fit. Does that make sense?
So you have some basic skill sets which are kind of good for baseline, but some of the more specific skill sets could kind of add value to your CV. And it's not the technology that you're developing, it's literally kind of skill sets and techniques that you are using in your academic career that become valuable on your CV for you.
Exactly. I mean, there are going to be specific companies that are working in the identical field to where you did your PhD. And there's a chance that they need someone to just continue that science in particular.
I would like to add something here actually, and I just wanted to let the audience know that at least in Lonza, whenever we hire process development scientists, so we also have to understand whenever a company is transferring or developing their process, they also need an assay side to it. They also need a very strong assay side because all the components that will be generated from that process, the drug or all that, they need to have a varied level of type of assays that are performed, to understand if that product is validated, the product is good, is it actually good for being released to the patient. So this is actually where a lot of my colleagues who actually have, a more molecular biology heavy skill set also find positions, because whenever you are submitting your application to FDA, it is not just the process part of it, but also the making sure that whatever came out from the process has gone through these assays, and the assays have validated that the product that was generated is good. So this is it is the group of these analytical scientists who have extensive training in ELISA, shape, PCR, Western blot, and things like that, who are not only optimizing the assays that can be used to tell if the process worked or not, but also working on validating the assays and making all kinds of paperwork, which is also submitted as a packet to the FDA or any regulatory agency. So it just actually depends on the job posting, as Jonathan said, if for me, what I used to do is, if I have a process development job application and it's not really saying specifically, okay, I exactly need bioreactor, exactly need molecular biology, I would actually go ahead and, apply and just take my chances, right? And talk to people, start that conversation, understand what's the requirement so that I'm ready for the next opportunity. But at least it would give me some idea that what is expected of me in the market. So this was just my thought process going into the job finding for process development and things like that.
That's a good point, Shreya. Can you just repeat what are some of the roles? What are some of the role titles that they can look out for these kind of assay bioanalytical? What do you call them?
Right. So, sometimes some job postings might be like process development - analytical services, process development - assay development, things like that. But it's very dependent on the company. They might have a completely separate department. They might not be called process development anymore. They might just be called an assay validation department. But in some companies, they might have it under the umbrella. So I guess it depends very much from company to company, and also the scale and the type of the organization, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
I agree. I agree with that. I can second that. There are different companies bring different things under process development. And in some departments, analytical department is under process development. Some other companies are completely separate, and so that would be a clear distinction, or that would be something that the applicant would need to pay attention to, and that can be helpful to them. Yeah.
Alireza, actually, on that note, someone has also asked in terms of kind of career growth prospects within this area, right? So how did you get your next step? How did you get your next step? How did you become a director essentially once you got into industry?
So as it is important for you to succeed in your job, to have your technical skills, and then your people and communication skills to have in your job. Another parameter that can play a significant role in your career progression is your connections, basically. So depending on who you know, who you can present to, who you work with at work, where they go after they move on from that company, and you have good relationship and working relationship with them, and then those give you opportunities over time as you mature in your career, when you're looking what is my next step. And there are different people might have different views in life. Some people might enjoy being a single contributor. The other people might want to go into the management track. So these all have different tracks that you can get onto. They require different skills that you need to work on and develop while you are working in your team. Having the opportunity to manage projects, working with other people in matrix form or direct reports would obviously be very important in finding that, making that leap from the scientific track to a management track. So I think finding those opportunities at your current job or your current position to develop those skills, and then also be active with your network.
So that's an interesting thing too, how to cope with upskilling while you have a job description, you have job responsibilities, right? So you have tasks and things you have to deliver on, and how do you kind of make sure that you're also upskilling at the same point, like gaining skills, so that you can move to the next level, or to a side, to a parallel level or a stream.
So yeah, that's a good question, right? And it would be something of a case by case basis. But overall, I think we are in a day and age, fortunately or unfortunately, that nothing is going to be constant, for more than a few months or a few years. Everything changes. People move. And these, provide opportunities. Sometimes, you're working on a team. As Jonathan mentioned, like when he started in process development for cell therapy, but then they asked him to move on to take on, the gene therapy, and that was probably, an opportunity that came up. He wasn't afraid of it. He got where he got. So not being afraid of jumping into new challenges when the opportunity arises gives you some of those opportunities. That's
a good answer.
Yeah.
Look out for the opportunities. Look out for the opportunities where they both kind of align. Actually, it's not two separate things in a sense. Your job description and your skilling up. Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
I think another thing is very important is to know your goal, is to understand your own goal, because there's no right or wrong. not everyone want to be a manager. Some people want to be, individual contributor and work on the science part, only need to convince their own manager to give the resource. I think that's totally fine as long as you understand what is your goal, and also timely communicate with the manager, with the company. Most of the company, they do have program to help you grow. For example, for me, I communicate with my manager a lot that I want to move up to a people manager track, and then after some work's done and also demonstrate my capability. Right now, I have a team, so I think it is very important that you know what's your goal and also communicate your goal with your manager and deliver your work.
Makes sense. What are some specific software or technical equipment that is kind of commonly you need people to be familiar with? Are there any kind of, here are two software that if then people think you're quite familiar with this. We use it widely within the process development, bioanalytical space or manufacturing space.
Yeah, I can take a stab at this one. On the software, less so on the software side, but more sort of a software related technical skill. Familiarize yourself with statistical design of experiments. A candidate who can tell me this is how I would design an experiment to have the statistical power to get a certain readout, and these are the statistical tests. And I might or might not use a software to do that. That gets you extra credits on the process development side. It often is seen to differentiate you from being a biologist who may not use those types of statistical methodologies. So familiarize yourself with statistical design of experiments.
Okay, great one. The last question I want to throw out there is a postdoc necessary? And in a yes or no form.
I can answer this question. So it's very situation dependent. So the reason I did a postdoc is, like, as I said, my PhD was in plants. I had not done human related or animal related things. So I needed those skill sets, right? That understanding to make my next transition. So I knew that I wouldn't get any opportunity in the industry. So it was a very conscious choice for me that I want to do a postdoc, gain the skill set, but I kept it very short. I had a postdoc just for a year because I was going in with a very fixed goal that, okay, I'm going to gain these experiences and then I'm going to move to the next stage. But I know many of my colleagues, they come fresh out of their PhD and they have started their job in the industry because maybe, the skill set, as Jonathan was saying, they have exactly those skill sets that is required by the industry. So it is very people dependent, the postdoc experience, at least in my experience. Yeah.
Anybody have an opposite answer? No. Okay. Well, on that note, I really want to thank our four panelists, Alireza, Shreya, Jonathan, and Kevin. Thank you so much for being with us today.